Claire Weston stood on the porch of a small wooden house on Maple Ridge at 7 in the morning, holding a thick envelope. Inside, it was a check for $500,000. Frost still clung to the roof above her. She knocked. The man who opened the door was not the elderly doctor she had imagined for 15 years. He was tall, hair uncombed, wearing a flannel shirt, looking at her with the eyes of someone pulled from sleep too early and finding no good reason for it. "I'm here to see Dr. Raymond Calloway," she said. "I have something I need to repay." The man looked at her directly. Then he said, "He passed away 3 months ago." The envelope in Claire's hand did not fall, but she wanted to let it. He did not invite her in right away. He stood in the doorway in the thin morning light, one hand on the frame, watching the woman in the gray cashmere coat standing in the low mist, and he waited. It was not rudeness. It was the deliberate stillness of someone who had learned that the first words a stranger offers are rarely the whole story. Outside it was cold the way November gets cold in Asheville, dry and still, the kind that turns every breath into white smoke and makes the morning feel like something that has to be earned. She told him her name. She told him why she was there. She had been a medical student in Boston, 22 years old, when the car accident happened. She had been conscious through most of it, and had lost consciousness somewhere between the street and the operating room. She had woken up 2 days later with a surgical scar and no bill. The nurse had told her the surgeon had marked the chart self-pay and left a note that said simply, "Take care of yourself." She had not been able to get his name until years later. She had spent a long time after that looking for Raymond Calloway, and she had finally found him too late, apparently, by 3 months. Daniel listened to all of it. Nothing in his face moved much, except for a small tightening along the jaw when she said Boston. He looked down at the envelope for a moment, then he stepped back from the doorway and let her in, not because he wanted to, but because small footsteps had already appeared on the stairs behind him. Owen was watching from the landing with the wide-eyed, unguarded curiosity of a 9-year-old who had heard every word and was not going to pretend otherwise. The inside of the house was tidy, in the way a man keeps a house when he is raising a child alone. No decorative pillows, no flowers, nothing soft on the surfaces that did not serve a purpose. But on the shelf near the far wall hung a black and white photograph. An older man standing before a hospital entrance, his coat over one arm, looking at the camera with a quiet and settled expression. Claire recognized him immediately. It was Raymond, younger than he had been when she last thought of him, but unmistakably the same man. Daniel went to the kitchen to make coffee while Owen ate cereal at the counter. The movements were practiced and automatic, the morning ritual of two people who had worked out their arrangement over years without needing to discuss it. He did not ask Claire what she wanted. He set 3 mugs on the counter by reflex, then paused, and looked at the third one as if he had only just realized what he had done. He carried one to where Claire had sat, and placed it in front of her without explanation or eye contact. She watched his hands when he set the mug down. The knuckles were thickened. The skin across his fingers was roughened from years of work with pipe and wrench and cold metal. They were not the hands she had imagined on the son of a celebrated surgeon, not even close to what she had pictured. She set the envelope on the table. She explained that the money inside was not charity and not pity. It was a personal obligation she had set for herself from the day she had become capable of fulfilling it. She had not wanted to die without squaring the debt. Daniel looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He slid it back across the table toward her with 2 fingers, not pushing it away so much as returning it. My father didn't do what he did to get something back. Not angry, not sharp, just flat and certain, the way a person states something they stopped questioning a long time ago. It was the first time in years that Claire found herself sitting across from someone with nothing to say in response. Owen looked over from the counter. "Do you want sugar?" he asked. Completely ordinary. The kind of question only a child asks in exactly that way, at exactly that moment. The tension in the room shifted just enough for both adults to breathe without effort. She drove back to the aloft Asheville after the morning visit. Not because she was giving up, but because she needed to think without his house around her. She needed to think in a room that had not been shaped by 2 generations of Calloway men. She opened her laptop and called her assistant, and asked for everything that existed on Raymond Calloway medical records, professional history, anything that had been publicly filed. The file arrived within a few hours. It was considerably larger than she had expected. Raymond Calloway had not been an ordinary surgeon. He had been the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Boston General Hospital, appointed at 41 and holding the position for 12 years. He had received the National Physician Excellence Award in 2009 and again in 2012. Across the medical community, he had accumulated a reputation that the profiles described as close to irreplaceable, specifically for his work on congenital heart defects in newborns and young children. The cases other surgeons declined. The cases with survival odds that made the paperwork difficult. He had taken them anyway, and the outcomes spoke for themselves over more than a decade of documented results. He had resigned in 2014. Abruptly, with no public explanation given, and none requested in any of the coverage she could find, because what coverage existed was minimal. A brief notice in a hospital newsletter, a small item in a Boston medical journal noting his departure. He had cleared his office in a week and had disappeared from the professional medical system entirely. He had relocated to Asheville, North Carolina. He had grown a vegetable garden behind a small wooden house on Maple Ridge. He had lived there quietly, without publication or public appearance, until he died. The man currently running a plumbing shop on Lexington Avenue was the son of one of the most gifted cardiac surgeons of his generation, a man who had chosen to vanish rather than continue in the light, and Daniel had told no one, had offered no one a single sentence of explanation. Claire drove back to the shop in the late afternoon. She left the envelope in the hotel room. Daniel was beneath a kitchen sink that a customer had brought in on a hand truck, a corroded drain assembly with visible mineral deposits around the joints. He heard her come in, finished what he was doing, pulled himself out from under the counter, and stood. He wiped his hands on a rag and waited. "Your father walked away from everything he had in Boston," she said. "Do you know why?" He held her eyes for a moment. "Some of it, but that was his. That was the whole answer." No invitation to continue the question, no defensiveness in his voice, either just a boundary stated with the same quiet matter-of-factness with which he had returned her envelope. She recognized it for what it was, not secrecy but respect. He had protected his father's privacy the same way his father had apparently protected him, without drama, without making anything of it. She changed direction. She asked about the shop instead, about how long he had been in Asheville, about whether he had always wanted this kind of work or whether it had been a choice made by elimination. His voice changed when she shifted the subject, not warmer exactly, but less contained. He had wanted something he could finish, he said. Something with a clear answer at the end of the day, fixed or not fixed, done or not done, the kind of result you could look at and know. She was standing near the door when he said it, almost to himself. The way a person says something they have been holding for a while and finally decides to set down. "My father used to say that when people go looking for someone who helped them, it's not usually to pay them back. It's because they still don't understand why that person helped in the first place." She did not answer. She walked to her car. She drove back to the hotel and lay awake past midnight with that sentence in the room. In the morning, she sat with her laptop open and the airline booking page in front of her, and closed it again without typing anything. She still had not booked a return flight to Charlotte. Claire had planned to be in Asheville for 2 days. On day 3, she had not booked a return flight, and she had gone an entire morning without allowing herself to examine why. She ran into Daniel and Owen at a hardware store on Clingman Avenue in the early afternoon. She had not arranged it. Asheville was not large enough to make coincidence improbable. Owen was standing before a wall display of wrenches, with an expression of careful professional deliberation that the store clerk behind the counter had the good sense not to find funny. Daniel stood a few feet back, watching his son work through the decision. Claire noticed them before they saw her. She stood in the adjacent aisle for a moment and watched without announcing herself. She watched the way Daniel waited while Owen picked up one wrench and then another and held them side by side for comparison. He did not offer an opinion. He did not tell Owen which one to pick. He asked a question instead. She could not hear the words from where she stood, and then he waited, genuinely waited, for the answer Owen gave him to matter. She had seen men stand beside their children the way they stand beside furniture, present but adjacent, not truly together. This was something different. Owen spotted her first. He grabbed Daniel's sleeve and pointed with the unself-conscious directness of a child who has not yet been taught that pointing is considered impolite. 3 minutes later, the three of them were walking down Marymount Avenue. Owen had proposed lunch. Daniel had not said no. Claire had not asked why she was included in the proposal, and neither of them had explained it. The restaurant was a plain burger place with paper napkins and a daily specials board written in marker. It was the kind of place that was not trying to be anything, and in that particular way it was comfortable. Owen talked through most of the meal. He asked Claire what exactly she did at her company and whether that meant she was on her phone all day. He asked whether she had a dog. He asked whether she knew how to fix a toilet. He asked, with complete sincerity, why her hair was straight when his dad's was curly, and whether she thought it was fair that his dad had the curly kind. Daniel ate. He did not redirect his son or apologize for him. He let Owen navigate the conversation in whatever direction Owen found interesting, in the way a person who genuinely trusts a river to find its own course is able to watch without interfering. Through Owen's questions and Owen's unguarded answers to questions nobody asked him, Claire learned things about Daniel that she understood Daniel would never have offered directly. That he read business books after Owen went to bed propped up with a highlighter, according to Owen, who found this funny for reasons he could not fully articulate. That he read to Owen aloud in the evenings and attributed this practice to Owen's preference, though Owen said with matter-of-fact certainty that his dad liked it too, and just didn't want to admit it. That the only photograph currently in Daniel's wallet was a small print of Owen and Raymond at a lake outside the city. Owen, wearing a life jacket 2 sizes too large, Raymond caught mid-laugh at something just outside the frame, the kind of laughter that is not performed for anyone. She was getting the story of a man the way his 9-year-old son told it, without omission, without flattery, without the careful editing that adults apply to themselves when they feel observed. At the end of the meal, Daniel looked across the table at her. "You're still here," he said, not a question, not criticism, just an observation placed on the table between them. "I'm not finished," she said. They both understood that what she had said and what she meant were not entirely the same thing. Neither of them said anything about the difference. The inspector arrived at Daniel's shop on a Tuesday morning before 9 o'clock. He was from the Asheville Urban Planning Office, and he carried a clipboard and spoke in the measured, pleasant tone of someone delivering news they have practiced delivering. The property, he said, had been flagged for inclusion in a traffic corridor expansion review. Business licensing would require re-evaluation in light of potential zoning reclassification. Daniel had 30 days to submit a written response or to voluntarily suspend operations pending the outcome of the assessment. Daniel had heard the name Halford once from his father, not accompanied by explanation, just the name and the particular quietness in Raymond's voice when he said it that told Daniel this was not a subject to ask about further. He had left it there. Now he thought he understood the shape of it better than he had. He did not react in front of the inspector. He took the paperwork with both hands, nodded once, and showed the man out. Then he folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer beneath the counter and went back to what he had been doing before the knock on the door. He did not call anyone. He did not mention it to Owen at dinner. That same morning, Claire was sitting at a small coffee shop on Broadway with her laptop open and Raymond's file on the screen. She had come back to it again, looking for the thread she could feel, without yet being able to see clearly. A woman sat down across from her without invitation. She appeared to be in her mid-60s, with close-cropped gray hair and the careful, economical movements of someone who had spent decades working with precision instruments. She set a cup of tea on the table as though she had been sitting there all along and had simply stepped away for a moment. "You're the one looking for Raymond Calloway," the woman said. It was stated, not asked. Claire began to introduce herself. The woman shook her head slightly. "I know who you are." She paused. She looked at Claire with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was not warm either, the expression of someone who has decided to say something they have been weighing for a while. "Be careful. There are people who would prefer you stopped where you are." She stood, pushed the chair back, and walked out through the front door into the morning without looking back. She left the tea sitting untouched on the table. Claire watched the door for a moment. Then she closed Raymond's medical file and opened a new window. Senator Gregory Halford, North Carolina State Legislature, third-term re-election campaign currently active. She read his financial disclosures with the same approach she brought to every investment portfolio she had ever reviewed, looking not for what was there, but for the lines that did not quite meet, the numbers whose spacing suggested something between them had been removed. In 2014, the year Raymond had resigned, A significant medical malpractice case in Boston had been withdrawn before reaching trial. The physician named in the suit had been shielded by a law firm whose senior partner was documented in public records as a regular donor to Halford's political campaigns and a personal acquaintance. The thread was thin, barely traceable, but Claire had built an entire company on knowing which thin threads were worth following to their end. That evening, Daniel appeared at the hotel with Owen's jacket. Owen had left it on the back seat of her car at lunch and had apparently not mentioned it until dinner time. It took 30 seconds to return it in the hallway. Daniel stood in the doorway for longer than 30 seconds. He looked at the room, at the laptop open on the desk, at the browser windows arrayed across the screen. At her, he did not ask what she was working on. He did not explain why he remained at the threshold longer than the jacket required. He said, "Thank you," and left. They both knew the word was not about the jacket. Dr. Helen Park lived on Kimberly Avenue, in a house with a front garden that was considerably larger than one person needed, and tended with the kind of care that suggests the garden is not incidental. She was on her knees between two dormant rosebushes when Claire turned up the front walk, pulling winter weeds from the base of the plants with unhurried, practiced efficiency. She looked up without surprise, in the way of someone who had been expecting a visit and had not been certain when it would arrive. They sat on the porch with tea. The sky above the western ridgeline was pale and cold and very still. Helen held her mug in both hands and looked out at the street for a moment before she began. Raymond had been asked to sign a medical report he knew to be false. A physician who moved in Halford's extended circle socially, politically, through the kind of professional adjacency that powerful people cultivate without ever documenting it, had been named as the responsible party in a malpractice suit. A patient had died. The circumstances were ones that warranted full examination and had not received it. The false report that Halford needed Raymond to sign would have redirected responsibility and ensured the matter went no further. Raymond had read it. He had understood what it was. He had put it back on the table and said no. Halford had then communicated, through intermediaries and eventually directly, the specific consequences that would follow Raymond's refusal. Licensing reviews. Planted complaints with the state medical board, a formal investigation that would begin with nothing and be engineered to accumulate. The kind of institutional pressure that doesn't need to find anything real, because the process itself is the punishment. Raymond had listened to all of it. He had submitted his letter of resignation the same afternoon. He had cleared his office over the following week. He had never returned. He didn't want to be a hero about it, Helen said. Her voice was even and steady. She had clearly told this story before, at least to herself. He just wanted clean hands, and he wanted Daniel kept completely outside of whatever came next. Claire asked the question she had been waiting to ask since she had first heard Helen's name. Why had she not told Daniel? Helen was quiet for a long time, not avoiding the question, sitting with it, the way a person sits with something that has no easy answer and should not be rushed toward one. Raymond asked me not to. He felt Daniel was already carrying as much as a person should be asked to carry. His wife gone, his son to raise alone, the shop to keep. Raymond did not want to add a story to that weight, especially a story with his name at the center, that he would not be present to explain. Claire drove away from Kimberly Avenue with a heaviness that settled in her chest and did not shift. It was not anger. It was something closer to recognition, the specific weight of understanding a choice that was not hers to make and that she would not have made the same way, and recognizing nevertheless why it had been made. Raymond had protected his son in complete silence. He had carried the whole of it himself and arranged for none of it to outlast him. That was a particular kind of love, the kind that does not ask to be acknowledged, because acknowledgement would require the other person to know what they were being saved from. She did not drive back to the hotel. She moved through the city for a while without direction, through the residential streets east of the river, around the lower end of downtown, back through the neighborhoods she had learned to navigate over the past several days. She ended up stopped at the curb across from the shop on Lexington. The front was dark, the closed sign hanging in the door, but the back window showed light, a steady amber glow, the kind that means someone is at a workbench and intending to stay there. She sat in the car looking at it. She had been good at next steps for most of her adult life. It was, in many practical ways, the thing she did best. She did not know the next step now, not because she was lost, but because planning, which had served her well in every other context she could remember, felt like the wrong tool for wherever she had ended up. The printer at the shop had been jammed for 2 days. Daniel needed documents printed that morning, technical specifications for a commercial contract, multiple pages of measurements and pipe diagrams that could not be photographed adequately on a phone. Owen was the one who suggested going to the hotel. He said it with the easy confidence of someone who assumed the suggestion would be received as sensible, because to him it was. Daniel looked at his son for a beat and did not argue. Claire opened the door in her work clothes, the morning already underway. Her laptop was running on the desk with several windows open. One of them was not entirely minimized. She saw it as she reached for the trackpad. Owen had already walked in and settled into the desk chair, as though he had been invited to sit there, which he had not, but which also did not seem to have occurred to him as a potential issue. He was looking at the screen. He read the name the way children read things aloud when they encounter something they recognize, without realizing they are doing it, because they have not yet learned to monitor that impulse. "Halford," Owen said. "I know him. Grandpa didn't like him." Daniel went still in the doorway. Claire set down her pen. Owen turned in the chair and continued in the same unhurried, conversational voice he used when telling Daniel what had happened at school. He said that one afternoon, not that long before Grandpa had gotten sick, the two of them had been sitting in the living room watching something on television when Grandpa's phone had rung. Grandpa had picked it up and held it a little away from his ear. Owen had always thought this was because Grandpa's hearing wasn't as good as it used to be, but looking back, maybe it was different. And for a moment, Owen could hear the voice on the other end clearly, because it was loud. Grandpa had said a few words and ended the call. Then he had put the phone on the cushion beside him and looked at Owen for a moment, and he had said, "Owen, if anyone ever mentions that name to you in the future, I want you to remember something. Good people don't protect themselves by hurting someone else." Owen had not understood it at the time. He had nodded because Grandpa seemed to need him to. He remembered it now because Grandpa's voice had been different from how it usually sounded, quieter and more careful with each word, the way Grandpa's voice got when something mattered to him more than usual. The room was quiet when Owen finished. He looked from his father to Claire, with the open, mild puzzlement of someone who has said something entirely ordinary and cannot account for why it has caused two adults to stop moving. Daniel looked at his son for a long moment. The expression on his face was not one Claire had seen on him before. It was the look of a parent who has realized that their child has been carrying something significant without knowing it was significant, and who is working out what to do with that realization. Then he looked at Claire. She told him what Helen Park had told her. All of it. Not because she needed him to know in order to do anything with the information, because he deserved the full story of his father's life, and the full story had not been given to him, and he was the person it belonged to. Daniel asked Owen to go down the hall to the vending machine and get himself whatever he wanted. He handed him $1 and Owen went without question, the door pulling shut behind him with the click of a hotel latch. Daniel sat down in the chair Owen had been using. He looked at his own hands for a while, the way he looked at pipe fittings when he was working out a problem, studying the surfaces, reading what was there. Then he said, "I knew he left something behind in Boston. I just didn't know it was that large." Claire said, "He left all of it, to keep the one thing he thought was worth keeping." Daniel did not ask her to explain what she meant. He already knew. The formal closure order arrived at the shop by courier 2 days later. 14 days of mandatory suspension, the notice said, for infrastructure safety review. No specific code violation was cited. The language was the kind that is built to be technically defensible, while being practically punishing the kind of document that means nothing has to be proven, because the process alone is enough to cause the intended damage. For a small shop running seasonal service contracts, 2 weeks of forced closure meant lost jobs, already scheduled, and clients already committed who would not wait. Daniel called a lawyer he had worked with before. The lawyer told him an appeal was possible, but would take longer than 14 days to resolve, and the legal fees would be significant for something that might resolve on its own. Daniel thanked him and said he would think about it. He hung up and sat in the empty shop tools on the pegboards, fittings organized in their labeled bins. The whole operation paused in waiting and did not say anything to anyone. That afternoon Claire received a text from him. 3 sentences. The facts stated without any request attached. Just the situation as it stood. communicated to her the way you communicate something to a person you have come to think of as someone who should know. She read it twice. Then she opened her contacts and dialed the main number for Senator Halford's legislative office. She gave her full name to the receptionist without softening or preamble. She said she was currently in Asheville and believed she and the senator had a subject worth discussing in person. She named Raymond Calloway. She named the year 2014. She said she thought the senator would find the timing of a meeting convenient. Halford called back in 19 minutes. They met at the Omni Grove Park Inn the following morning. It was the right location for what needed to happen, the kind of establishment where serious things are discussed in pleasant surroundings, where everyone at the table understands that the pleasantness is courtesy and not confusion about the nature of the conversation. Claire wore nothing that announced itself as deliberate, which meant she was wearing exactly what she always wore. Halford arrived with the confident handshake and the calibrated smile of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms where those two things are expected of him. He sat down before she had settled fully into her chair. She did not raise her voice. She did not make accusations. She set a thin folder on the table and opened it facing him. Inside was a timeline she had assembled from public records and financial disclosures, the billing activity of his legislative office between 2013 and 2015, the name of the attorney who had managed the malpractice case withdrawal and whose firm's client list overlapped with Halford's donor network, and one document she had been particularly careful in locating. An invoice for legal consulting services rendered to Halford's office, dated 3 days after Raymond Calloway had submitted his letter of resignation to Boston General. "I have no plans to use any of this," she said. Her voice had the same even conversational quality it carried in investment meetings, when the numbers were already on the table and there was nothing left to perform. "Not unless you continue to make things difficult for Daniel Calloway." Halford looked at the folder. He looked at her. The smile stayed in place. It simply stopped operating above the level of the mouth. 3 days later, at 6 in the morning, an email arrived in Daniel's inbox from the city planning office. The closure order had been rescinded. The stated reason was a revised assessment of corridor expansion priorities. The email was 4 sentences and contained no apology and no explanation. Daniel read it standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee in his hand that he had not yet drunk. Owen was still asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. Daniel stood in the kitchen for a longer time than reading 4 sentences required, looking at nothing in particular, and then he put down the coffee and started the day. He came to the hotel that evening without Owen and without anything requiring exchange. He stood at the door and said it straight. "I know it was you. I don't need you to confirm it. I just wanted to say thank you out loud instead of in writing." Claire opened the door wider. He came in and they sat at the small table by the window. Not on the sofa, not across a desk, not in a restaurant with a table between them that served other purposes. Just the table by the window, 2 chairs, 2 glasses of water, the low, warm glow of the lamp on the desk behind them, and the dark ridgeline of the mountains visible through the glass. No agenda, no document, nothing left to accomplish. The room had the quality of a conversation that is beginning because there is nothing else left to do except begin it. He talked about his father the way he had not talked about Raymond to anyone since the funeral. He said that when he was 10 years old, Raymond had spent 3 Saturday mornings showing him how to read an X-ray, not to teach him medicine, not to push him toward anything. Just because, Raymond had said, a person ought to understand how their own body works. He said that the reason he had gone into plumbing genuinely, the actual reason, not the version he offered when someone asked, was that he had wanted work he could look at when the day was over and know whether it was done, fixed or broken, sealed or leaking, a result you could confirm with your hands. Claire told him about leaving medical school. She had gone back to it after the accident, thinking that what she had experienced waking up alive on the other side of something she had not expected to survive would make her a better doctor, would clarify her purpose. Instead, it had clarified something else, that protection takes many forms, and she had started to understand which form she was built for. Money, structured correctly and deployed with intention, could protect people in ways that a surgical residency would not have let her reach. She had taken that understanding and built something with it. She said this not to justify herself. She said it because she was sitting across from someone who had asked her nothing, and with whom she felt, for reasons she had not fully worked out, no particular need to perform an explanation, and who she was therefore explaining herself to anyway. It was the first time since arriving in Asheville that she had talked about herself without it being in service of something else. She noticed this as she was speaking. When Daniel stood to leave, he looked at her for a moment that went on 2 or 3 seconds past what the ordinary logic of departure required. He did not add anything to it. Neither did she. He put his hand on the door handle and paused before pressing it down. One beat of stillness, no longer, and then the door closed behind him, and the room was quiet again. Claire stood looking at the closed door. Then she went back to the table and opened her laptop and navigated to the airline website. She looked at the calendar for a while. She looked at the available morning flights back to Charlotte. Then she closed the window without selecting anything. She did not book a flight. She did not tell herself she would do it in the morning. She just closed the window and sat for a while in the quiet room, and did not make any decisions about tomorrow. Saturday arrived, and Claire had no professional reason left to stay in Asheville and no intention of leaving. Daniel mentioned the Blue Ridge Parkway on Thursday in passing, and by Friday evening Owen had converted the mention into a formal itinerary. The itinerary included turkey sandwiches wrapped in foil, a thermos of hot chocolate that Owen had negotiated as a necessary provision, and a small spiral-bound notebook he had designated for bird documentation. He explained that looking at birds was more scientific when you wrote things down. They were on the trail by 8 in the morning. The air was cold and completely still, the bare trees silver against the pale November sky, the ground beneath the trail surface firm with last night's cold. Owen ran ahead with the notebook under one arm, stopping at intervals to examine something or write something, or look around with the proprietary air of someone conducting an authorized survey. Daniel and Claire walked at the pace of people who are not going anywhere in particular, and are both aware of it. There was no table between them, no document waiting to be discussed, no careful management of what was said and what was not said, just the trail, and the cold air, and the sound of their boots on frozen leaves. Owen found a large caterpillar near a fallen log, impressively large, he noted, for November, and summoned Claire with the tone of someone filing an official report. She crouched beside him without hesitation and took a photograph, studying the caterpillar with evident interest. She asked Owen what species he thought it was. Owen considered this for a genuine moment, then offered a name that was clearly Latin in structure and entirely invented in content. He said it with complete composure. Daniel watched Claire take the photograph. Something in the way he was watching shifted a small thing, nothing that could be pointed at directly, but the kind of thing that, once noticed, cannot be unnoticed. At the high overlook, the trail curved and the valley opened below them, the city visible as a small arrangement of rooftops and roads in a bowl of mountains, ridgelines folded blue behind blue in the distance. Owen stood at the observation railing and looked out for a moment. Then, without building toward it or finding a diplomatic framing, he asked Claire whether she was coming back. The question landed in the air between all three of them. Owen was looking at Claire. Claire looked at Owen, and then she looked at Daniel, who had turned his gaze to the middle distance of the valley with the focused, settled attention of a man who has discovered a sudden and consuming interest in the topography of western North Carolina. "I think so," she said. Daniel continued looking at the valley, but something in the set of his shoulders changed the smallest possible release, a letting go of something held, the kind that goes unnoticed unless you are paying close attention. Owen appeared satisfied by this and returned to the notebook. Claire looked back at the valley too. In the afternoon they came back to the house. Daniel noticed a split in the third stair tread that he said had been bothering him, and got out his tools and fixed it, while Claire sat on the sofa with a book open in her lap. Owen fell asleep beside her with the bird notebook face down on his chest, one foot tucked under him. 4 birds recorded and 2 of the names questionable. The house was quiet in the specific way. It gets quiet when everyone in it has settled into the same unhurried rhythm, not silent from absence, but full and easy from the presence of people who are not working to be anything other than where they are. The morning Claire actually left, she had been awake since before 5. The bag had been packed since the night before. The flight was at 11. Daniel arrived at 9 and she carried her own bag to the car, and neither of them made anything of that. Owen had set his alarm early. He was downstairs in his school clothes when she came through the kitchen, and he shook her hand before she went out the door. He used both of his hands, and did it seriously, the way a child does, when they have decided that a moment requires formality because it matters and should be marked properly. Then he went back to his cereal, and Claire followed Daniel out to the car, and the door of the house closed behind them. The drive to the Asheville Regional Airport was mostly quiet. The mountains caught the morning light at a low angle. The bare oaks and maples on the hillsides turned bronze and amber. The sky above the ridgelines a pale, clear blue that held no weather in it. Claire watched it through the window. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. What was not said between them in that 20 minutes was not the silence of people who have run out of things to say. It was the silence of people who have said enough and know it. At the departure drop-off, he pulled to the curb. She got out, pulled her bag from the back seat, and stood beside the open passenger door. He left the engine running. He did not get out. She held the door frame with one hand and looked in at him. "I came here to repay your father," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not sure I did." He looked at her then, not the way he had looked at her on the first morning, measuring what she was and how much of it to trust. Just directly, without the assessment. He would have told you there was nothing to repay. "But I'm not him." She held the door frame. Outside, the airport moved around them in its slow Tuesday morning way, a couple unloading a minivan, a man in a reflective vest pushing a cart, an announcement from inside the terminal that she could not quite make out. "Is Asheville good in January?" she asked. "Cold," he said. "But fine." She nodded once. She closed the passenger door carefully, with both hands, so it closed quietly. She walked through the automatic doors into the terminal and did not look back, not because she didn't want to. Because some things are better when you leave them where they happened, whole and undisturbed, instead of reaching back and adjusting them after the moment has passed. He sat at the curb after she went inside. Not because he was uncertain about leaving, or because he was waiting for something to happen. Because there are moments that deserve to be finished at the pace they set for themselves, and he had stopped being the kind of person who rushed those moments a long time ago, around the time he learned what it cost when they ended before you were ready. He pulled out when a van behind him needed the space. He drove back on the small road into Asheville, with the morning sun cutting low and golden through the stripped oaks along the ridgeline. The light, the particular amber of November, the kind of light that doesn't apologize for the cold that comes with it. For the first time in 4 years, he was not thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about January. He was thinking about a woman who had appeared on his porch at 7 in the morning with an envelope and a debt that had never, in any of its important particulars, been about money. Neither of them had set out looking for this. That was exactly the reason it might be real.